Take her, someone in the conference room whispered under their breath. She's the only woman here no man would ever fight you for. The comment was meant as a joke, the kind of quiet cruelty that floated easily through the glass offices of Carter and Vale Corporation. But Olivia Brooks heard it anyway as she stood beside the long mahogany table clutching a stack of quarterly reports. She didn't react. She never did. After 2 years working as a secretary on the 28th floor of one of Manhattan's most powerful investment firms, Olivia had learned that silence was armor. The city glittered outside the floor-to-ceiling windows, a skyline of steel and ambition stretching for miles. But inside the conference room, she might as well have been invisible. At 5'4", dressed in a modest gray cardigan and practical flats, her brown hair tied into a simple knot, Olivia blended into the background of a world that preferred polished perfection. Her coworkers rarely bothered to hide their opinions. They whispered about her thrift store wardrobe, about the way she kept her head down, about how strange it was that a woman who worked for billionaires seemed so completely uninterested in looking like one. Olivia simply organized the files, refilled the water glasses, and quietly did her job better than anyone else in the room. Across the table, Ethan Carter barely noticed any of this. At 34, he was already worth more than most corporations, the youngest CEO in the firm's history, and a man the financial magazines called Wall Street's quiet storm. Tall, composed, and impossibly controlled, Ethan had the kind of presence that silenced a room the moment he walked into it. Dark navy suit, silver watch, sharp blue eyes that rarely lingered long on any single person. Meetings with him moved fast, decisions faster. And secretaries? They existed somewhere in the background of his world, necessary but forgettable. Olivia was simply another name on a payroll sheet. The meeting dragged past 6 o'clock, the winter sky outside turning a deep navy over Manhattan, when Ethan's phone buzzed against the polished table. He glanced at the screen once and exhaled slowly, the faintest sign of irritation crossing his otherwise calm expression. His assistant leaned toward him. "Your mother confirmed tonight's dinner at Leclerc." Ethan nodded slightly. Leclerc was one of those restaurants where reservations were measured in months, where every table held someone powerful enough to change a career with a single handshake. Tonight's dinner wasn't about food. It was about family pressure, about introductions, about the carefully arranged social expectations that came with the Carter name. The problem was the woman he was supposed to meet there. Ethan didn't want another orchestrated relationship, another polite evening pretending to consider a future he had no interest in building. He glanced around the room as executives gathered their folders and stood to leave. That was when his eyes briefly landed on Olivia Brooks. She was standing near the door, quietly sorting documents into a binder, unnoticed as usual. For a moment, Ethan studied her, not because of how she looked, but because of what she wasn't. She wasn't trying to impress anyone. She wasn't watching him with calculation the way others did. She simply worked. The idea appeared in his mind almost instantly. Practical, efficient, unexpected. "Miss Brooks," Ethan said calmly, his voice carrying across the room. Olivia looked up in surprise. Most days he never spoke directly to her. "Yes, Mr. Carter?" she asked softly. Ethan closed his laptop and slid it into his briefcase. "Do you have plans tonight?" The question hung strangely in the air. Several executives exchanged curious glances. Olivia blinked once. "No, sir." Ethan adjusted the cuff of his jacket as if what he was about to say was the most ordinary thing in the world. "Good," he replied. "Then you're coming to dinner with me." For a moment, no one moved. The quiet hum of the office seemed to freeze in place as Olivia Brooks stood by the door holding her binder, unsure if she had heard correctly. Dinner. With the chief executive officer of the company. Several people in the room looked from Ethan Carter to Olivia and back again, their confusion barely disguised. Ethan, however, looked completely calm, as if inviting his secretary to an upscale Manhattan restaurant were the most routine scheduling decision in the world. Olivia felt heat rise in her cheeks, but kept her voice steady. "Sir, I am not sure I understand." Ethan slipped his phone into his jacket pocket and walked toward the door, his polished shoes making soft echoes against the marble floor. "It is simple," he said evenly. "I need someone to accompany me to a dinner tonight. My assistant is unavailable, and you are still here." The explanation sounded practical, almost clinical, but the executives nearby clearly did not believe it was that simple. One man raised an eyebrow, while another quietly suppressed a laugh. Olivia hesitated. She had spent most of her life trying not to attract attention, and suddenly every eye in the room seemed fixed on her. "Mr. Carter," she said carefully, "I do not think I am the right person for something like that." Ethan paused and turned slightly toward her, studying her face with quiet focus. For the first time, Olivia realized he was truly looking at her rather than past her. "You are organized, punctual, and you already know my schedule," he replied. "Those are the only qualifications required for tonight." The logic was difficult to argue with, yet the room remained thick with disbelief. One of the junior managers leaned toward another and whispered something that made both of them grin. Olivia heard the word secretary spoken with a mocking tone. Ethan either did not notice or did not care. "The reservation is at 7:30, he continued calmly. "LeClaire on West 57th Street. The name alone made Olivia swallow nervously. LeClaire was the kind of place she had only seen through the windows while walking past on her way to the subway. White tablecloths, soft gold lighting, the kind of restaurant where people celebrated million-dollar deals over dessert. She had never stepped inside. "Sir," she said again, trying once more, "I do not have the clothes for a restaurant like that." Ethan glanced briefly at her cardigan and simple shoes, then nodded slightly, as if acknowledging a practical concern. "That problem has already been solved," he said. He reached into his briefcase and removed a slim envelope before handing it to her. Olivia accepted it carefully and opened it just enough to see the card inside. It was from a luxury boutique only a few blocks away, along with a note printed in precise handwriting. "A dress has been prepared in your size. Please arrive before 7. Olivia looked up at him, stunned. Ethan adjusted his cuff again, already turning toward the elevator. "You have 1 hour, he said evenly. "Meet me in the lobby at 7:15 sharp." With that, he stepped out into the hallway, leaving behind a room full of executives staring at Olivia Brooks as if the quiet secretary they had, ignored for 2 years, had suddenly become the most unexpected mystery in the building. The elevator ride down felt longer than usual. Olivia Brooks stood inside the mirrored walls, clutching the envelope in both hands while the numbers above the door slowly descended from 28 to the ground floor. The reflection staring back at her looked the same as it always had. Simple brown hair tied back, pale cardigan, careful posture of someone who had learned long ago not to take up too much space in a room. Yet the envelope in her hands felt like a small piece of another world. When the elevator doors opened into the evening rush of Midtown Manhattan, the city greeted her with the sharp chill of winter air and the glow of yellow taxi lights sliding through traffic along Fifth Avenue. Olivia checked the time on her phone. 6:22. Less than an hour. She had no idea why Ethan Carter had chosen her, and the thought alone made her stomach tighten with nerves. Still, she walked quickly toward the address printed on the boutique card, her sensible shoes tapping against the sidewalk as people in dark coats hurried past her toward subway entrances and office towers. The boutique stood between two luxury storefronts, its tall glass windows glowing warmly against the darkening street. Olivia hesitated outside for a moment. She had passed places like this many times before, but had never stepped inside. A small sign on the door displayed a name she recognized from fashion magazines she sometimes flipped through at the grocery store checkout line. The kind of place where a single dress could cost more than her monthly rent. She took a slow breath and pushed the door open. Soft music floated through the air along with the faint scent of fresh fabric and perfume. A woman behind the counter looked up with a welcoming smile as if Olivia belonged there. "Good evening," the woman said kindly. "You must be Miss Brooks." Olivia blinked in surprise. "Yes," she answered quietly. The woman stepped forward with effortless confidence. "We have been expecting you." Mr. Carter arranged everything. Olivia followed her deeper into the boutique, past elegant racks of clothing and mirrors framed with warm golden light. She felt strangely out of place, like someone who had accidentally wandered onto a movie set. The woman led her to a dressing room where a garment bag hung neatly against the wall. "Your dress is inside," she explained gently. "Take your time." Olivia unzipped the bag and slowly pulled the dress free. For a moment, she simply stared. The fabric was a deep midnight blue that caught the light like the surface of water. The design was simple yet graceful, nothing flashy, but the craftsmanship was unmistakable. Olivia ran her fingers carefully along the smooth fabric, afraid she might somehow damage it. She had not worn something this beautiful in years. The last time she had dressed up had been before everything changed, before hospital bills and late-night shifts and the quiet responsibilities that had reshaped her life. She stepped into the dress and looked up at the mirror. For several seconds, she did not recognize the woman standing there. Her hair, once tied tightly into its usual knot, had been gently brushed out by the stylist who had quietly appeared to help her. The deep blue fabric framed her shoulders elegantly, and the simple cut of the dress revealed a natural confidence she had never noticed before. Olivia tilted her head slightly, studying her own reflection with disbelief. She did not look like the invisible office secretary anymore. She looked like someone entirely different. Down on the street outside, the city lights flickered brighter as night settled over Manhattan. And somewhere in the lobby of Carter and Vale Corporation, Ethan Carter was already waiting. The lobby of Carter and Vale Corporation glowed with polished marble floors and tall glass walls that reflected the golden lights of Midtown Manhattan outside. Ethan Carter stood near the entrance with the quiet confidence of a man who had spent his life in rooms like this. His posture was relaxed, one hand resting lightly in the pocket of his tailored coat, while the other checked the time on his silver watch. 7:12 in the evening. For most executives, the workday had ended hours ago, but Ethan was accustomed to schedules that stretched late into the night. Dinner meetings, negotiations, charity events, family obligations. They were all part of the same carefully managed world. Yet tonight felt slightly different, though he could not immediately explain why. The glass doors opened as another wave of cold winter air slipped into the lobby. A group of employees leaving the building stepped aside politely when they noticed the chief executive officer waiting near the entrance. Some offered respectful nods before hurrying into the busy street outside, where taxi horns echoed between tall buildings. Ethan barely noticed them. His mind was already reviewing the evening ahead. The dinner at LeClaire had been arranged by his mother weeks earlier, a meeting designed to introduce him to the daughter of a powerful family partner. In the Carter family, such dinners were rarely about romance. They were about alliances, expectations, and the quiet pressure that came with wealth that had lasted for generations. Ethan had attended many of them before, each one polite, controlled, predictable. Tonight, however, he had decided to change the rules. The elevator chimed softly behind him as the doors opened. Ethan glanced toward the sound without much thought, expecting another employee finishing a late shift. But when Olivia Brooks stepped out into the lobby, the quiet space seemed to pause for a moment. The transformation was impossible to miss. The midnight blue dress caught the warm lobby lights in soft reflections that moved gently as she walked forward. Her hair, usually tied back with simple practicality, now framed her face naturally, and the calm nervousness in her eyes gave her an elegance that had been hidden beneath years of quiet routine. Ethan Carter did not move for several seconds. The confident businessman who negotiated billion-dollar deals without hesitation suddenly found himself unexpectedly still. He had remembered the efficient secretary from the office upstairs, the woman who organized files and rarely spoke unless necessary. The person walking toward him now looked like someone entirely different. Olivia slowed her steps when she saw him standing near the entrance. She felt a wave of uncertainty rise again as she approached. "Good evening, Mr. Carter," she said softly. Ethan blinked once, returning to his usual composed expression, though something thoughtful lingered in his gaze. "Miss Brooks," he replied calmly. "You are exactly on time." Olivia nodded politely, trying not to draw attention to the nervous flutter in her chest. The security guard near the desk watched the exchange with clear curiosity. He had seen the quiet secretary enter the building every morning for years, always dressed modestly and moving quickly through the lobby without anyone noticing. Tonight, even he looked slightly stunned. Ethan opened the glass door for her and gestured toward the waiting black sedan parked along the curb. Outside, snow had begun falling lightly across the city, the small white flakes drifting through the glow of streetlights like slow-moving sparks. Olivia stepped outside beside him, the cool air brushing against her face as the sounds of Manhattan evening traffic surrounded them. Ethan walked around the car and opened the passenger door before glancing at her once more with quiet interest. "Miss Brooks," he said evenly as she prepared to sit down, "I believe this evening may be more interesting than I expected." The black sedan moved smoothly through the evening streets of Manhattan, while soft snow drifted through the glow of streetlights outside the windows. Olivia Brooks sat carefully in the passenger seat, her hands folded neatly in her lap as the city passed by in reflections of gold and white across the glass. She had ridden in taxis before, but this felt entirely different. The car was quiet, warm, and carried the calm atmosphere of a world she had only ever seen from a distance. Ethan Carter sat beside her with the composed posture that had made him one of the most respected figures on Wall Street. Yet tonight he found himself glancing at her more often than he expected. For several minutes neither of them spoke. The driver guided the car through midtown traffic while the sounds of horns and distant sirens faded behind the insulated doors. Finally, Olivia broke the silence with a polite tone. "Mr. Carter, may I ask you something?" Ethan turned his head slightly toward her. "Of course." Olivia hesitated for a moment before continuing. "Why did you choose me tonight?" Ethan watched the passing buildings for a moment before answering. "Because you were still in the office," he said simply. Olivia gave a small, thoughtful nod, though she was not entirely convinced the explanation was that simple. She had spent enough time observing people in corporate meetings to recognize when someone was offering only part of the truth. Ethan noticed the faint curiosity in her expression and allowed a quiet smile to appear. "And," he added calmly, "because you are someone who does not try to impress me." Olivia blinked slightly in surprise. "Most people who work for you probably do," she replied. Ethan gave a small nod. "Constantly." The car slowed as it approached West 57th Street, where the elegant lights of Leclerc restaurant shone through tall windows, framed with polished brass. The building stood like a quiet jewel among the towering structures of Midtown, its entrance glowing warmly against the snowy evening. The driver stepped out first and opened the door for them. Olivia took a careful breath before stepping onto the sidewalk. The soft snowflakes brushed gently against her hair while the lights of the restaurant reflected across the smooth pavement. For a moment, she simply stood there taking in the scene. Couples dressed in elegant coats entered through the doors while a valet greeted guests with quiet professionalism. Ethan walked beside her toward the entrance, his pace relaxed and confident. As they approached the doors, several people already waiting outside turned to look. Olivia felt their attention immediately. Some of them clearly recognized Ethan Carter. The wealthy businessman whose face appeared regularly in financial magazines rarely went unnoticed in places like this. But tonight the attention shifted quickly toward the woman beside him. The midnight blue dress moved gracefully as Olivia walked, the fabric catching the warm light from the entrance lamps. Conversations paused for a second or two as people quietly tried to identify the unfamiliar woman accompanying one of the most powerful men in the city. Ethan noticed the reaction as well. For the first time since the evening began, he understood something unexpected. The quiet secretary from his office had just stepped into a world where she belonged far more naturally than anyone upstairs had ever imagined. The host at the entrance greeted them with a respectful smile. "Good evening, Mr. Carter. Your table is ready." Ethan nodded and gestured politely toward Olivia. "After you, Miss Brooks." As she stepped inside beneath the warm golden lights of the restaurant, neither of them realized that the simple dinner ahead would quietly change the way they saw each other forever. Warm golden light filled the dining room of Leclerc, while the quiet hum of conversation and the soft clink of silverware created the elegant rhythm of a Manhattan evening. Olivia Brooks stepped carefully beside Ethan Carter as the host guided them past neatly arranged tables where business leaders, investors, and socialites enjoyed late dinners beneath crystal chandeliers. The restaurant carried the quiet confidence of a place that had witnessed countless deals and whispered alliances over the years. Yet tonight, as they moved through the room, several guests subtly paused their conversations. Ethan Carter was a familiar presence in financial circles, but the woman walking beside him was not. Olivia felt the attention immediately, though she kept her posture calm. Years of working quietly in a corporate office had taught her how to remain composed even when people underestimated her. The host stopped beside a table near the tall windows overlooking the snowy city street below. "Your table, Mr. Carter," he said politely. Ethan nodded in appreciation and gently pulled out Olivia's chair before taking his own seat across from her. The table was set with white linen, polished glasses, and a small candle whose flame flickered softly between them. For a moment Olivia simply looked around the room, taking in the atmosphere. Everything felt calm and graceful, from the quiet music playing somewhere in the background to the smooth efficiency of the waitstaff moving between tables. Ethan watched her with quiet curiosity. "Is this your first time here?" he asked calmly. Olivia gave a small smile. "Yes, Mr. Carter. It is also the first time I have been inside a restaurant where the chairs probably cost more than my monthly rent." Ethan allowed a brief laugh to escape, the sound surprisingly relaxed. "Then tonight you should enjoy it," he replied. A waiter approached and placed 2 menus in front of them. Olivia opened hers carefully, her eyes scanning the elegant descriptions of dishes she had never seen before. The prices alone made her pause for a moment, but she kept her expression polite. Ethan noticed the hesitation and spoke gently. "Order whatever you would like. Tonight is not about the menu." Olivia looked up slightly. "Then what is it about?" Ethan leaned back in his chair thoughtfully. "Avoiding a conversation I do not want to have," he answered honestly. Olivia raised an eyebrow with quiet curiosity. "With your family?" Ethan nodded once. "They arranged tonight's dinner. A meeting with someone they believe would be a suitable partner for me." Olivia understood immediately. In the corporate world, she had seen many powerful families treat relationships like business contracts. "And you decided to bring your secretary instead," she said calmly. Ethan met her gaze with a small hint of amusement. "Yes." Olivia allowed herself a gentle smile before returning to the menu. The waiter returned moments later and took their orders while the candlelight continued to dance softly between them. As the evening unfolded, something unexpected began to happen. The quiet secretary who had spent years unnoticed in the background of Ethan Carter's company started speaking with a calm intelligence that surprised him. She asked thoughtful questions about architecture when she noticed the design of the restaurant, commented on the snowfall outside with quiet appreciation, and even shared a brief story about growing up in a small town where winter nights felt peaceful rather than busy. Ethan found himself listening more closely than he usually did during formal dinners. The conversation flowed easily, free from the calculated politeness he had grown used to in business meetings. For the first time in a long while, the evening did not feel like a negotiation. It felt real. And somewhere between the first course and the quiet laughter that followed one of Olivia's gentle observations about New York traffic, Ethan Carter began to realize something surprising. The woman sitting across from him was far more remarkable than the world upstairs in his office had ever bothered to notice. The candle between them burned lower as the evening continued, its small flame reflecting softly against the polished glasses on the table. Outside the tall windows, snow continued to fall over Manhattan, drifting slowly through the golden glow of streetlights and the steady stream of traffic moving along West 57th Street. Inside Leclerc, the atmosphere remained calm and elegant, yet at their table something subtle had changed. Ethan Carter found himself leaning slightly forward, listening more carefully than he had planned when the evening began. Olivia Brooks, the quiet secretary who rarely spoke during corporate meetings, was no longer the silent presence he remembered from the office. When she spoke now, her voice carried a calm intelligence and a quiet warmth that drew his attention naturally. "You mentioned earlier that you grew up in a small town," Ethan said as the waiter placed the main course gently on the table. "Where was that?" Olivia smiled faintly as she folded her napkin across her lap. "A place called Maple Glen," she replied. "It is about 200 miles north of here. The kind of town where everyone knows each other and the grocery store closes at 8 in the evening." Ethan nodded thoughtfully. "That sounds very different from Manhattan." Olivia glanced toward the snowy city outside the window. "It is quieter," she said. "In winter, the whole town feels peaceful after sunset. The streets are covered with snow and you can hear the wind moving through the trees instead of car horns." Ethan studied her expression for a moment. "Do you miss it?" Olivia considered the question carefully before answering. "Sometimes," she admitted. "But New York also gives people opportunities they would never find in a small town." Ethan raised an eyebrow slightly. "Opportunities like working for Carter and Vale?" Olivia gave a soft laugh. "Something like that." The waiter stepped away again, leaving them alone with the quiet glow of the candle and the gentle music in the background. Ethan took a moment before speaking again. "You handle complex financial schedules every day with impressive precision," he said calmly. "That is not a skill people usually learn in small towns. Where did you study?" For the first time that evening, Olivia hesitated. The pause was brief, but Ethan noticed it immediately. She looked down at the table for a moment before answering in a steady voice. I studied art before I moved to New York. Ethan blinked with surprise. Art? Olivia nodded. Painting mostly. I attended an art program for 2 years. Ethan leaned back slightly, clearly intrigued. That explains something, he said. Olivia looked up. What does it explain? Ethan gestured lightly toward the restaurant around them. You noticed the architectural design of this room within the first 10 minutes of sitting down. Most people only see the menu. Olivia smiled quietly. Artists notice details. Ethan studied her again with renewed curiosity. What happened to your art studies? The question hung gently in the air between them. Olivia remained silent for a few seconds before answering. Life happened, she said softly. My father became ill during my second year of school. Medical bills began to pile up, and someone needed to support the family. Ethan understood immediately. In the world he grew up in, money solved most problems. But he had met enough people to know that many families lived under very different circumstances. Olivia looked up again, her expression calm and sincere. Working as a secretary may not have been the dream I imagined when I first came to New York, she added quietly. But it allowed me to help my family when they needed it. Ethan said nothing for a moment. For the first time that evening, he realized that the woman sitting across from him carried a depth of strength and responsibility that no one in his office had ever bothered to notice. And somehow that realization made the quiet dinner feel far more meaningful than the arranged meeting he had originally tried to avoid. The dinner plates were cleared quietly by the waitstaff, while the soft music in the background continued to drift through the elegant dining room of LeClaire. Outside the tall windows, the snowfall had grown slightly heavier, covering the sidewalks of Manhattan with a thin silver layer that reflected the lights of passing cars. Ethan Carter leaned back slightly in his chair, studying Olivia Brooks with a thoughtful expression that had not been there when the evening began. The story she had shared about leaving art school to support her family lingered in his mind. In the world he grew up in, most people pursued their dreams with the safety of wealth behind them. Olivia had done the opposite. She had quietly set her dreams aside for someone else. Ethan folded his hands lightly on the table. Do you still paint? He asked calmly. Olivia looked surprised by the question. For a moment, she seemed unsure how to answer. Then she gave a small, almost shy smile. Sometimes, she said. Not as often as I used to. Work keeps me busy. Ethan nodded slowly, though he sensed there was more to the story. What do you like to paint? Olivia glanced toward the window where snowflakes drifted slowly through the streetlights. Landscapes mostly, she said softly. Places that feel peaceful. Forests in winter. Small lakes at sunrise. Quiet towns after snowfall. Ethan listened carefully. Her words painted pictures as clearly as any brushstroke might have. You describe them like someone who sees the world differently than most people, he said. Olivia shrugged gently. Artists usually do. A brief silence followed, comfortable rather than awkward. Around them, the restaurant remained alive with quiet conversations and laughter from other tables. But the small space between them felt almost separate from the rest of the room. The waiter returned with dessert menus, placing them neatly beside the candle. Ethan barely glanced at his before looking back at Olivia. If you had continued your art studies, he asked thoughtfully, what would you be doing now? Olivia took a moment before answering. Probably living in a tiny apartment somewhere and trying to sell paintings to tourists, she said with a quiet laugh. Ethan smiled slightly. That sounds honest. Olivia nodded. Art usually is. Ethan studied her again, curiosity growing stronger. The woman who organized spreadsheets and meeting schedules in his office every day had a completely different world inside her mind, one filled with colors and landscapes he had never imagined. You know, he said slowly, most people in my company spend a lot of time trying to impress me with numbers and business strategies. But none of them have ever described a snowfall the way you just did. Olivia laughed softly. That might be because they are not artists. Ethan raised his glass slightly in a quiet gesture. Perhaps I should hire more artists. Olivia smiled politely, though she assumed he was joking. But Ethan Carter rarely joked without meaning something deeper. As dessert arrived and the candle burned lower between them, he found himself thinking about something unusual. For years he had built a company around logic, numbers, and careful strategy. Yet sitting across from Olivia Brooks, listening to her talk about quiet lakes and snowy forests, he began to realize something unexpected. The woman everyone in his office had overlooked might possess a kind of perspective his carefully controlled world had been missing all along. The restaurant had grown quieter as the evening moved deeper into the night, the soft glow of candles reflecting across polished glass and silver while the last few tables finished their desserts. Outside, the snowfall had turned steady, coating the sidewalks and rooftops of Manhattan with a calm white layer that softened the noise of the city. Olivia Brooks sat across from Ethan Carter, her hands gently wrapped around the warm porcelain cup of tea the waiter had brought moments earlier. The conversation between them had drifted easily for nearly 2 hours, moving from simple observations about the city to deeper reflections about life, work, and the quiet sacrifices people made for the ones they loved. Yet just as Olivia was beginning to relax into the calm rhythm of the evening, something unexpected happened. The tall glass doors at the entrance of the restaurant opened again, allowing a gust of cold winter air to sweep briefly through the dining room. Several guests near the entrance turned their heads, and a woman stepped inside with the confident elegance of someone accustomed to being noticed. She was tall, dressed in a sleek ivory coat that framed her figure perfectly, her dark hair styled neatly over one shoulder. The moment the host greeted her, several diners whispered quietly to each other in recognition. Olivia noticed Ethan's posture shift slightly across the table. It was subtle, but the change did not escape her attention. The woman removed her coat and handed it to the attendant before scanning the room with sharp, observant eyes. When her gaze landed on Ethan Carter sitting beside a woman she clearly did not recognize, her expression hardened for a fraction of a second before she began walking toward their table. Olivia lowered her teacup slowly. "Do you know her?" she asked gently. Ethan sighed quietly, already understanding what was about to happen. "Yes," he replied. "Unfortunately." The woman approached their table with graceful but determined steps, her heels making soft echoes against the polished floor. When she reached them, she offered a polite smile that did not quite reach her eyes. "Ethan," she said smoothly. "What a surprise." Ethan stood politely, maintaining his calm expression. "Victoria," he replied evenly. Olivia looked between them with growing curiosity. The name alone carried a certain weight in the financial world. Victoria Hale was the daughter of one of the largest investment partners connected to the Carter family. Their names had appeared together more than once in society columns over the years, often accompanied by speculation about future marriage plans between the two powerful families. Victoria's gaze shifted slowly toward Olivia, studying her from head to toe with quiet calculation. "And who is this?" she asked lightly, though her tone carried an unmistakable edge of curiosity. Ethan answered without hesitation. "This is Olivia Brooks." Olivia stood politely and offered a respectful nod. "It is nice to meet you." Victoria returned the nod with a faint smile that seemed carefully controlled. "Olivia Brooks," she repeated softly. "I do not believe I have heard Ethan mention you before." Ethan remained calm. "Olivia works at Carter & Vale." Victoria's eyebrows lifted slightly. "Does she?" she replied with mild amusement. Her eyes moved again over Olivia's elegant dress before returning to Ethan. "Your secretary has excellent taste in evening wear." The comment hovered in the air like a thin veil of politeness hiding something sharper underneath. Olivia understood immediately that she had just stepped into a far more complicated situation than a simple dinner invitation. And, judging by the quiet tension now resting in Ethan Carter's expression, the evening was only beginning to reveal its true challenges. Victoria Hale remained standing beside the table, her posture elegant and perfectly composed while the faint murmur of conversations continued around them. The soft restaurant lighting reflected against the polished floor as several nearby diners quietly observed the unexpected encounter. Olivia Brooks could feel the subtle attention from surrounding tables, but she kept her expression calm and respectful. She had spent years learning how to remain steady, even when others tried to make her feel out of place. Victoria folded her arms lightly and turned her attention fully toward Ethan Carter. "I was under the impression," she said smoothly, "that we were supposed to have dinner tonight." Ethan met her gaze with the same controlled composure he carried into every business negotiation. "That arrangement was suggested," he replied evenly. Victoria tilted her head slightly. "Suggested by your mother," she corrected. Ethan did not argue. The truth of the statement hung quietly between them. Olivia glanced down briefly at the candle on the table, allowing the two of them space to speak. Yet Victoria's attention quickly returned to her. So, Victoria continued with a thin smile, this must be the famous Olivia Brooks. Olivia looked up with mild surprise. Famous? She repeated politely. Victoria's smile widened slightly, though it carried a sharp edge. Any woman who manages to replace a family dinner arranged months in advance deserves at least a little recognition. Ethan's expression hardened just slightly. Victoria, he said calmly, there is no reason to make this uncomfortable. Victoria raised her hands lightly as if surrendering. Uncomfortable? Not at all. I simply find the situation interesting. She looked again at Olivia's midnight blue dress and elegant posture. I did not expect the mysterious replacement to be someone from your office. Olivia answered with quiet dignity. Mr. Carter invited me this evening. I did not realize there were other plans involved. Victoria gave a soft laugh that sounded almost musical. Of course you did not. Ethan stepped forward slightly, his voice firm but controlled. Olivia has done nothing wrong. Victoria turned back to him, her expression thoughtful now rather than mocking. That is not what concerns me, she said quietly. What concerns me is that your mother will ask questions tomorrow morning. Ethan remained calm. Then I will answer them. For a brief moment the tension between them settled into silence. The candle on the table flickered gently while the waiter in the distance pretended not to notice the situation unfolding near the window. Finally, Victoria straightened her coat and offered Olivia another polite smile. It was nice meeting you, Miss Brooks, she said smoothly. I hope you enjoy the rest of your evening. Olivia nodded respectfully. Thank you. Victoria turned back toward Ethan, her voice lowering slightly. We will speak later, she said. It was not a threat, but it carried the quiet certainty of someone who was used to getting answers. Without another word, she walked away across the dining room, her confident steps quickly blending back into the elegant rhythm of the restaurant. Ethan watched her leave before slowly returning to his seat. For a moment, neither he nor Olivia spoke. Finally, Olivia looked at him with gentle curiosity. I suppose that was the conversation you were hoping to avoid tonight. Ethan allowed a quiet breath to escape as he looked back toward the snowy street outside the window. Yes, he said calmly. And somehow it found me anyway. Yet as he glanced back at Olivia sitting across from him, he realized something surprising. Despite the unexpected tension that had just passed through the evening, he did not regret inviting her. In fact, the dinner had already become far more meaningful than the arranged meeting he had originally tried to escape. For a few moments after Victoria Hale left the table, the quiet atmosphere of the restaurant slowly returned to normal. Conversations resumed around the room, glasses clinked gently again, and the waiter discreetly cleared the empty dessert plates from Ethan and Olivia's table as if nothing unusual had happened. Yet the air between them had changed. Olivia Brooks looked down at the candle flickering softly in the center of the table, her thoughts turning carefully over the brief encounter. She had worked in the corporate world long enough to recognize the kind of power and expectation that followed someone like Victoria Hale. The daughter of a major financial partner did not simply appear at a restaurant by coincidence. Ethan Carter watched the snow falling beyond the window for a moment before speaking again. I apologize for that interruption, he said calmly. Olivia lifted her eyes and offered a small, reassuring smile. There is nothing to apologize for, she replied gently. I imagine people in your world are used to unexpected meetings. Ethan allowed a quiet breath to escape. Perhaps, he said, but I prefer my evenings to be less dramatic. Olivia gave a soft laugh. Then tonight must have been unusual for you. Ethan glanced back at her and nodded slightly. Very. For a moment, neither of them spoke. The calm silence felt different now, more thoughtful than before. Finally, Olivia tilted her head slightly with quiet curiosity. May I ask you something else? Ethan nodded. Of course. Olivia rested her hands lightly on the edge of the table. Why did you really invite me tonight? Ethan looked at her steadily, considering the question. The simple explanation he had given earlier suddenly felt incomplete. Because I needed a reason to avoid that dinner, he answered honestly. Olivia smiled faintly. That part one understood. Ethan continued, his voice thoughtful now. But there was another reason. Olivia waited quietly. Ethan leaned back slightly in his chair. Most people who spend time around me have an agenda, he said calmly. They want something. A deal, a promotion, an investment, a connection. Olivia nodded slowly. That happens in many workplaces. Ethan looked directly at her. You are the only person in my office who never asks for anything. Olivia blinked with mild surprise. I ask for things all the time, she said gently. Meeting confirmations, travel arrangements, financial reports. Ethan shook his head with a faint smile. Those are part of your job. Olivia understood his meaning then and gave a thoughtful nod. Outside the window, the snow continued to fall quietly across the city. After a moment, Ethan spoke again. Tonight was the first time I have had dinner in a long while. That did not feel like a negotiation. Olivia looked slightly amused. Then I am glad I was able to provide a peaceful distraction. Ethan studied her expression carefully. You provided something more valuable than that. Olivia raised an eyebrow in quiet curiosity. What is that? Ethan answered simply. Honesty. The word hung softly between them. Olivia felt a warm but unexpected emotion rise in her chest. She had spent years feeling invisible in the office upstairs, quietly doing her job, while others received recognition and praise. Yet tonight, sitting in a restaurant surrounded by the lights of Manhattan, she realized something surprising. Ethan Carter was not looking at her the way the rest of the company did. He was actually seeing her. And somewhere deep in Ethan's carefully controlled world, that realization was beginning to matter more than he had ever expected. When Ethan Carter and Olivia Brooks finally stepped out of LeClaire, the night had grown deeper, and the snowfall had turned the streets of Manhattan into a quiet silver landscape. The usual rush of the city had softened beneath the steady blanket of snow, and the bright lights from nearby buildings reflected across the sidewalk like scattered stars. For a moment, they both paused near the entrance of the restaurant, breathing in the cool winter air after the warm glow inside. The black sedan still waited at the curb, its driver standing nearby with quiet patience. Olivia wrapped her coat gently around her shoulders while looking up at the falling snow. It is beautiful tonight, she said softly. Ethan followed her gaze toward the drifting snowflakes that moved slowly through the light of the street lamps. New York rarely feels peaceful like this, he replied. Olivia smiled faintly. Snow changes everything. It slows people down. Ethan nodded slightly, realizing she was right. The city that usually moved with relentless energy suddenly felt calm and reflective. After a moment, he turned toward her. Thank you for coming tonight, he said sincerely. Olivia looked surprised. You invited me, she reminded him gently. Ethan gave a small smile. That does not mean you had to accept. Olivia considered that for a moment before answering honestly. I almost did not. Ethan raised an eyebrow. Why? Olivia looked toward the glowing windows of the restaurant behind them. Because people like Victoria Hale belong in places like that, she said calmly. People like me usually do not. Ethan studied her carefully. And yet you handled the evening better than most people who spend their entire lives in that world. Olivia laughed softly. That is probably because I was not trying to impress anyone. Ethan nodded thoughtfully. Exactly. The driver opened the car door for them again, but neither of them moved immediately. The quiet snowfall seemed to create a small moment of stillness between them. Finally, Ethan spoke again. Miss Brooks, he said, his tone thoughtful but certain. I would like to ask you something unusual. Olivia tilted her head slightly with curiosity. Unusual how? Ethan folded his hands calmly. Tomorrow evening my company is hosting a private charity event at the Carter Foundation Gallery. It is attended by investors, board members, and several members of the press. Olivia nodded slowly. That sounds important. Ethan met her eyes directly. It is. Olivia waited quietly. Ethan continued. And I would like you to attend with me. Olivia blinked in surprise. As your secretary? She asked carefully. Ethan shook his head. As my guest. The snow continued to fall softly around them, while the lights of the city shimmered in the background. Olivia felt the weight of the invitation settle in her thoughts. A charity event attended by powerful investors and journalists was far different from a quiet dinner in a restaurant. Mr. Carter, she said gently, I think people might misunderstand that situation. Ethan gave a small, confident smile. People misunderstand many things. Olivia studied his expression for a moment before asking the question that lingered in her mind. Why me? Ethan looked toward the snowy skyline of Manhattan before answering simply. Because tonight reminded me that the most remarkable people are often the ones everyone else overlooks. Olivia felt a quiet warmth rise in her chest at the sincerity of his words. and standing there beneath the falling snow, neither of them realized that the invitation Ethan Carter had just offered would soon change far more than a single evening. The ride back through Manhattan was quieter than the drive earlier that evening. Snow continued to fall steadily across the city, coating the streets and rooftops in a calm white layer that softened the usual noise of traffic. Olivia Brooks sat beside Ethan Carter in the back of the black sedan, watching the lights of passing buildings blur gently against the window. Neither of them spoke for several minutes. The silence was not uncomfortable. It felt thoughtful, like both of them were quietly replaying the unexpected events of the evening in their minds. Finally, the car slowed as it approached Olivia's apartment building on the Upper West Side, a modest brick structure that stood quietly between taller buildings that carried far more expensive addresses. The driver pulled to the curb and stepped out to open the door. Olivia looked toward Ethan with a small, polite smile. "Thank you again for dinner," she said sincerely. "It was very different from my usual evenings." Ethan returned the smile with calm warmth. "It was different from mine as well." Olivia stepped out of the car carefully, her shoes touching the snow-covered sidewalk, while the winter air brushed gently against her face. For a moment, Ethan remained inside the car, watching her as she stood beneath the streetlight near the entrance of her building. The snowflakes drifting through the warm yellow light reminded him of something she had said earlier about quiet winter landscapes. Without quite thinking about it, he stepped out of the car as well. Olivia looked slightly surprised when he joined her on the sidewalk. "Mr. Carter," she said softly. Ethan slipped his hands into the pockets of his coat as he looked up briefly at the falling snow. "You know," he said thoughtfully, "when I woke up this morning I expected today to be another ordinary business day." Olivia smiled gently. "And instead you had dinner with your secretary." Ethan shook his head with a faint laugh. "That is not how I will remember it." Olivia studied his expression with quiet curiosity. Ethan turned toward her again, his voice calm but sincere. "Tonight reminded me that success and money often surround people with noise. Meetings, negotiations, expectations. It becomes easy to forget what honesty feels like." Olivia felt a soft warmth rise in her chest at his words. She had never expected a simple dinner invitation to lead to a conversation like this. "Sometimes the quiet people notice things others miss," she said gently. Ethan nodded. "That is exactly what I realized tonight." For a moment, they both stood there watching the snow fall around them. The city lights reflected softly across the street, while distant traffic moved quietly through the winter night. Finally, Olivia stepped toward the entrance of her building. "Good night, Mr. Carter." Ethan inclined his head slightly. "Good night, Miss Brooks." Olivia opened the door and paused briefly before stepping inside. As she disappeared into the warm hallway of the building, Ethan remained standing on the snowy sidewalk for a moment longer. The evening had begun as a simple attempt to avoid an arranged dinner, yet it had ended with something far more unexpected. For the first time in many years, Ethan Carter realized he was looking forward to tomorrow not because of business opportunities or financial negotiations, but because he was curious to see Olivia Brooks again. And somewhere deep inside his carefully structured world, that quiet curiosity had already begun to change everything. A powerful evening in Manhattan quietly transforms two very different lives as a reserved office secretary unexpectedly joins a billionaire chief executive officer for a dinner that neither of them planned to remember forever. What begins as a simple attempt by a millionaire to avoid a family-arranged meeting slowly becomes one of the most touching millionaire stories about honesty, quiet strength, and the hidden value of people the world often overlooks. Inside an elegant restaurant filled with investors, socialites, and city lights, the billionaire discovers that the woman who has worked quietly in his office for years carries a rare authenticity that money and status cannot create. And their conversation moves beyond business into memories of small towns, abandoned dreams, and the sacrifices people make for family. When a powerful heiress connected to the billionaire's family unexpectedly appears, the evening reveals the complicated expectations surrounding wealth and influence. Yet the secretary handles the moment with calm dignity that surprises everyone watching. As the night continues beneath the warm glow of candlelight and the snow falling outside the restaurant windows, The billionaire realizes that the most remarkable individuals are often those who never seek attention, turning the dinner into one of those unforgettable millionaire stories where a simple act of honesty becomes more powerful than status. When the two step back into the quiet winter streets of New York City, the calm snowfall creates a moment of reflection that deepens the connection between the billionaire and the secretary, leading to a new invitation that will bring them together again at an important charity event where powerful investors and journalists gather. The billionaire understands that the woman beside him brings a perspective rarely found in his world of negotiations and corporate strategies. And this realization quietly reshapes how he sees both his life and his future. This heartfelt narrative continues the tradition of meaningful millionaire stories that explore how wealth, expectations, and social pressure often hide the deeper truths about kindness, loyalty, and quiet courage. Through thoughtful conversations, unexpected encounters, and the calm beauty of a snowy Manhattan night, the story shows how a simple dinner invitation can open the door to understanding between two people from completely different worlds, making it one of those rare millionaire stories that reminds audiences that authenticity and compassion often shine brighter than power or prestige. As the billionaire drives away beneath the falling snow, he realizes that the quiet secretary he once overlooked may be the most extraordinary person he has ever met, proving once again why heartfelt millionaire stories continue to captivate audiences who believe that genuine character is the greatest wealth anyone can possess. Character 1. White male billionaire CEO, around 34 years old, confident and refined, wearing an elegant navy-tailored suit and silver watch, clean hairstyle, calm intelligent expression, standing front view portrait, cinematic realism, professional lighting, Manhattan elite atmosphere, no cartoon, no CGI, no illustration. Character 2. White female office secretary, around 26 years old, gentle intelligent face with natural beauty, soft brown hair, elegant midnight blue evening dress, calm expressive eyes, front view portrait, cinematic realistic lighting, refined yet humble presence, no cartoon, no CGI, no illustration.